The sun was barely up when I heard screaming outside. "He's trespassing! Arrest him!" a high-pitched, furious voice yelled, bouncing off the quiet suburban streets. I ran to the window and froze. A man in what looked like a police uniform, badge, gun, the whole act, was pointing his weapon at my wife. "Drop the key, now!" he barked, sweat beading on his forehead. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a normal morning dispute. My wife, calm but alert, held the house key tightly, her eyes sharp like she was ready for war. I yelled, "Hey, that's our house! Stay back!" But she stepped forward, unshaken. "Back off, buddy," she said, voice low but icy. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." The fake cop laughed, thinking this was an easy scare. "This is HOA business. You're breaking rules. Hands off," he sneered, waving the gun like it gave him the world. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, dialing 911, but the signal cut out. Perfect, just perfect. My wife didn't flinch. She twisted her wrists subtly, and in a flash, the man stumbled backward as if something invisible hit him. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were tricking me. She moved closer, calm but deadly. "I served overseas. You're lucky this isn't your lucky day," she said, her stare piercing through his bravado. The neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering, shocked at the scene. "Did you see that?" one muttered. "Is she?" Another gasped. "I think she's military." The man's face drained of color, his fake badge shook in his hand. I'm just HOA security. I didn't," he stammered, clearly realizing he'd bitten off more than he could chew. I wanted to yell, "Call the real cops," but my wife raised a finger, signaling me to hold. She slowly stepped forward, calm, collected, every movement precise, like she had trained for this exact moment. The man dropped the gun, almost in disbelief, and the fake authority he wielded vanished like smoke. "Next time you think you can scare someone's family over a house key," she said, bending slightly to pick up the weapon safely, "remember who you're dealing with." Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, time froze. The neighbors whispered, eyes wide, capturing the exact moment justice started unfolding. I swallowed hard, awe and fear mingling. That was insane," I muttered. She shook her head. "Welcome to HOA warfare," she said, letting the tension hang in the morning air. The moment the fake cop hit the pavement, the HOA woman, yes, the one who had called him, stormed out from behind the bushes, heels clicking like warning bells. "You'll pay for this! I own this street!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my wife. Her face was red, veins popping, but the bravado was cracking. She didn't see the security camera mounted by our front door recording every second of her meltdown. My wife didn't flinch. She slowly stepped closer, letting the camera capture every move. "You really think yelling changes the facts?" she asked, voice calm but sharp. "This land isn't yours, that house isn't yours, and that gun? Not yours either." Her words cut through the morning air like a knife, and the HOA woman's confident stance wavered. Then, the impossible happened. The fake cop scrambled to his feet, panicked, fumbling with his badge. She's military. I didn't know," he stammered, pointing at my wife. But it was too late. The damage was done, recorded, and witnesses were stepping out of their houses. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some taking out phones. Whispers turned into gasps. Everyone could see the entitled HOA woman was losing control. "She trained SWAT units, didn't I tell you?" I whispered to my son, hiding him behind the corner. The HOA woman froze, realizing she had not only underestimated us, but had played her whole power card in front of dozens of witnesses and failed spectacularly. Her fake authority crumbled. Then my wife smiled coldly. "You've been making threats over a house key, and now you're on tape. Every lie, every fake notice, it's all evidence." The HOA woman's eyes darted around, panic replacing rage. She faltered, but no words could save her. The whole street was watching. I noticed something in her hand, a folder, papers flying out, HOA notices, threats, photos of neighbors' cars. She had been documenting everyone, thinking she was untouchable. Now, in that morning sun, it looked more like a confession than power. By now, a small crowd had gathered, phones out, whispers growing into chatter. The HOA woman's face twisted between fury and fear. She tried to shove the papers back into her folder, but one slipped, revealing a stack of forged notices, fake violations, fake fines, even fake signatures from the HOA board. My wife bent down, picking up a notice and holding it like evidence. "So this is your HOA?" she asked, voice calm but deadly. "Forged signatures, fake threats, and now you send armed men after innocent families?" The woman opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Every lie was exposed in plain sight. Then the fake cop, still trembling, muttered, I thought she just backed down. I didn't know she served overseas." He looked at my wife with a mixture of awe and fear. That moment was all the confirmation the neighbors needed. This wasn't some petty HOA dispute. This was real danger being met with real power. I stepped forward cautiously. "You do realize calling armed people on civilians is illegal," I said, keeping my voice steady. The crowd murmured, a mix of shock and approval. Some neighbors nodded subtly, as if silently thanking us for standing up. My wife's gaze never left the HOA woman. "You've spent years thinking you own everyone's lives," she said, tilting her head. "But today, you just proved how small and powerless you really are." Her hands rested casually on her hips, but the aura she carried told the entire street she could dismantle anyone who dared threaten her family. Then came the final twist of this moment. The HOA woman's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her eyes widened in terror. Security footage from another neighbor's door showing her planting fake notices on multiple houses was being live-streamed to a local community page. Within seconds, dozens of neighbors were watching, commenting, and recording. Her empire of lies was collapsing in real time. The HOA woman stumbled back, her face pale, phone still clutched in her shaking hands. The fake cop muttered something under his breath, glancing at her like she was the one responsible for this nightmare. But my wife wasn't done. She walked slowly toward them, every step deliberate, every neighbor watching in awe. "You think this ends with a little exposure?" she asked, voice low, dangerous. "Because what you just did, that's federal territory. Threatening civilians with a fake badge, that's a crime." The HOA woman's lips quivered. I was just enforcing the rules," she squeaked. Her eyes darted to the crowd, now filming, capturing every stutter, every fake excuse. The whispers turned to murmurs of disgust. "She's bluffing," one muttered nervously, but another neighbor whispered, "No, she's military. You don't bluff like that if you've been overseas." I finally found my voice. "You threatened my wife over a key, and sent a man with a gun on our land?" My hands shook, not from fear, but from disbelief at their audacity. The fake cop tried to regain control, raising his hands. We didn't know," but my wife cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Didn't know," she said, voice slicing the air. "You just pointed a gun at a woman who has trained SWAT units, and you call yourselves law?" The crowd gasped audibly. Some were already whispering about calling the police themselves. Others were clearly taking mental notes for evidence. Then my wife pulled something out of her jacket, a small badge and ID, not her military one, but a legal authority she had obtained years ago for property disputes. She held it up casually, as if the tiny metal rectangle was the only thing standing between chaos and justice. The HOA woman froze. The fake cop's jaw dropped. You have authority?" he stammered. "Yes," my wife said, calm but deadly. "And it gives me the right to protect my family, my property, and anyone you try to threaten. Today, you overstepped." She let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, almost theatrically, she turned and looked directly at the neighbors. "Any questions for these experts in fake authority?" Her smirk made the crowd chuckle nervously, but tension still hung in the air. The HOA woman's face was now a mix of rage, fear, and humiliation, the perfect storm of someone who had finally realized her power had limits. By mid-morning, the tension on the street had reached a boiling point. The HOA woman tried to retreat to her SUV, but my wife stepped in front of her, arms crossed, calm but unyielding. "Going anywhere?" she asked, voice soft but filled with warning. The woman hesitated, realizing that fleeing now would only make her look guiltier in front of all the neighbors and the cameras. The fake cop fumbled nervously with his radio, muttering about reporting back and orders. But the moment he moved, my wife's sharp eyes caught every twitch. "You're done here," she said simply. "No more pretending, no more threats. And your badge? Fake. That alone is felony impersonation." The man froze, realizing he had no way to talk himself out of this in front of an audience. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. My wife pulled out her phone and played a short video clip. It showed the HOA woman earlier that week planting fake violation notices on our and several neighbors' doors while pretending to take official HOA photos. The crowd gasped. Some whispered, "She's been doing this for weeks." Others gasped louder, realizing the scope of the scheme. The HOA woman's mouth opened, but no words came. She had been caught red-handed, and the evidence was irrefutable. She tried to snatch her phone back, but my wife didn't flinch. "Let it go," she said, voice calm. "You're going to need a lawyer, and the cops will be happy to see all of this." The fake cop suddenly spoke, his voice shaky. I didn't know about all of this." But everyone in the crowd could see his fear. He realized that being part of her scheme meant he was liable too. Then, the final shocking twist of the morning. One of our neighbors, a retired judge, stepped forward and said quietly but firmly, "You know, filing false complaints and sending armed men onto private property, that's not just unethical, that's criminal." The HOA woman's knees nearly buckled, and she looked around, realizing she had underestimated the entire neighborhood's awareness and legal knowledge. By noon, the street had transformed into a battlefield of truth versus lies. The HOA woman sat in her SUV, fists clenched on the steering wheel, glaring at the crowd who refused to leave. The fake cop hovered nearby, clearly regretting ever showing up, eyes darting nervously between us and the growing group of witnesses. My wife stepped onto the curb, phone in hand, ready to call the real authorities. "You wanted drama," she said, voice calm but cutting through the tension. "Now everyone sees who you really are." She pressed a few buttons, and a local security service, previously alerted, began streaming the footage live to the neighborhood watch page. Neighbors began sharing, tagging local news, and within minutes, dozens more were watching the chaos unfold. The HOA woman's face turned pale as the live feed showed her planting forged notices, threatening families, and coordinating fake security visits. "No, this isn't," she stammered. Every lie she had spun for weeks collapsed in real time, witnessed by her own neighbors. Then came the twist nobody expected. The fake cop, panicking, pulled out his own phone. "Wait, you're showing only half the story," he blurted. But my wife had anticipated this. Calmly, she tapped a few commands on her phone, switching to footage showing him accepting instructions from the HOA woman, armed and complicit. His protests evaporated under the undeniable proof. I watched, half stunned, half amazed, as the neighborhood whispered in collective shock. "She thought she could own everyone," one neighbor muttered. "Now she's gonna pay for it." The power dynamic had shifted completely. What started as a morning scare had turned into a public exposure, legal evidence, and social shaming, all at once. Finally, my wife turned to me, smiling faintly, almost casually. "They underestimated us," she said. "Never underestimate someone protecting their family, or someone trained to handle people like this." The HOA woman tried to speak, but her words fell flat amidst the crowd's murmurs and the flashing cameras. By late afternoon, the tension had shifted from confrontation to reckoning. The HOA woman, still pale and flustered, was being cornered by both neighbors and the growing pile of evidence on our phones. The fake cop, now visibly sweating, kept glancing around, realizing he could be in as much trouble as she was. My wife didn't wait for the authorities to arrive. She calmly approached the HOA woman, holding up the security footage. "You tried to scare us, manipulate us, and threaten a family over lies," she said slowly. "But now every single step you took is on record. Every forged notice, every fake complaint, every armed visit, it's all documented." The woman's lips quivered, and she tried to mutter something, but nothing credible came out. Then came the shocking twist. A neighbor stepped forward, holding a small stack of letters. "This HOA woman has been sending threatening notices to multiple houses, not just yours," he said, handing them to my wife. She glanced over, eyebrows raising. Each letter contained false claims, fines, and even threats of legal action, clearly intended to intimidate residents into compliance. I could see the change in the fake cop's eyes. He tried to step away, but my wife called him out. "And you? You thought pointing a gun at my wife would solve anything? You're lucky no one got hurt." His face turned ashen, realizing that his compliance with her scheme could land him in serious trouble. The final twist of the day hit when one of the neighbors, a retired attorney, said, "You realize threatening residents with false authority and armed intimidation is a felony, right? You're both liable." The HOA woman's jaw dropped, and her confident facade finally cracked. I stepped closer, speaking for the first time. "You thought a little intimidation could give you power over a street, but real power doesn't come from fear, it comes from standing up to it." My wife smiled faintly, a mix of satisfaction and relief. She had not only protected our family, but exposed the full extent of their deceit. By evening, the street had quieted, but the tension still lingered like a thick fog. The HOA woman sat on her porch steps, defeated, clutching her folder of forged notices, while the fake cop leaned against his car, muttering apologies under his breath. My wife stood in the driveway, arms crossed, surveying the small crowd of neighbors who had watched the entire saga unfold. The final twist came when the real police arrived, summoned by a neighbor who'd been watching the live feed. They approached calmly, taking in the scene. The HOA woman's panicked expression, the fake cop's trembling hands, and the evidence laid out across the driveway. My wife handed over the footage and letters. The officers nodded, immediately recognizing the severity of the crimes: impersonation, intimidation, and multiple counts of harassment. The HOA woman tried one last plea. "Please, it was just rules. But the lead officer shook his head. "You crossed the line. You threatened residents with a firearm, forged official documents, and involved someone in impersonating law enforcement. You're under arrest." Handcuffs clicked, and the woman's screams echoed down the street, now meaningless against the truth she had tried to hide. The fake cop was taken aside, and after a brief conversation, it became clear he would face charges as well. The neighbors whispered among themselves, a mix of awe and relief. They had witnessed not just a victory for one family, but a statement that lies, intimidation, and fake authority wouldn't go unchecked. I finally breathed, watching my wife relax, though her gaze still carried the sharp edge of a soldier. "All in a day's work," she said softly, almost to herself. I laughed quietly, amazed at how she had turned what could have been a nightmare into a masterclass of control, courage, and strategy. As the sun set, the street returned to calm, but the story lingered. The HOA woman and her accomplice would be remembered not for power, but for their spectacular fall. And the neighborhood had a new hero, my wife, the Army vet, who reminded everyone that courage, skill, and integrity will always outshine fear.